If you walk through Toronto's Distillery District today, there's a spot almost everyone misses. Right at Trinity Street and Gristmill Lane, the cobblestone road curves in an unusual way, and you can see the red brick curve clearly in the cobblestones. This isn't random and it's not for decoration, but those red bricks quietly trace the outline of a landmark that once defined the entire city. There's a small tiny plaque, but really there isn't much to describe the history of what once stood here. And yet, this outline marks the footprint of one of Toronto's greatest landmarks. A windmill so important that sailors use it to navigate, artists painted it into history, and surveyors used it to draw the limits of the harbor itself. This is a story of the Gooderham and Wartz windmill, how it rose, how it vanished, and how it quietly changed the destiny of the city. To understand how powerful this windmill was, you have to forget modern Toronto. In 1832, the town of York had fewer than 4,000 residents, and the city barely stretched north of Queen Street. The shoreline sat far closer to where the Distillery District stands today. And at the mouth of the Don River, surrounded by scrub, brush, and open shoreline, a 6-story brick windmill rose above almost everything else. And it wasn't subtle, it dominated the skyline of the time. Only the occasional church spire or tall tree climbed higher. Most buildings in the town of York were small and wooden, and this windmill was massive. A circular brick structure designed to catch the strong wind sweeping across Toronto Bay. For people arriving by lake, it was one of the first things they saw. The man behind the construction of the windmill was James Wartz. He wasn't a dreamer chasing novelty, he was a professional miller. Raised on the fertile plains in southeast England, Wartz spent nearly 18 years operating a mill. In 1818, he married Elizabeth Gooderham. Her brother, William Gooderham, would soon become his business partner. But by the late 1820s, Britain was in the grip of a severe economic depression. In 1831, he crossed the Atlantic with his 14-year-old son, James Gooderham Wartz, and came to York. Just south of Front Street and east of Parliament, he bought a small plot of land from the province of Upper Canada, land that had once formed part of a public reserve near the Don River. Using money provided by William Gooderham, Wartz began constructing a windmill modeled after those he knew back in Britain. Tall, circular, and positioned to capture as much wind as possible off the bay. The plan was simple: grind wheat, sell flour, and supply bakers. Whiskey wasn't even part of the vision, at least not yet. The scale of construction was enormous for a town this small. The windmill used 105,000 bricks. It required 216 bushels of quicklime and 1,000 loads of sand. 12 laborers worked on the site, and Wartz recorded everything, including their behavior. In his notes, workers were described as partly drunk, drunk half a day, sleepy drunk, dead drunk, and memorably, drunk as David's sow. Despite it all, the structure rose, and by the summer of 1832, William and Elizabeth Gooderham arrived in York just as the windmill neared completion. When the wooden cap and sails were hoisted into place, the tower became one of the tallest structures in the entire town, and for a city of fewer than 4,000 people, it was impossible to ignore. If we look back at some of the earliest sketches of the time, we can tell that the town was obsessed with the windmill. It appeared in sketches and paintings of early York, including scenes of skaters gliding across frozen Toronto Bay with the tower looming in the background. And most importantly, surveyors relied on it. An imaginary boundary known as the windmill line stretched across the bay from the tower towards Fort York, limiting how far wharves and jetties could extend into the water. For sailors, the windmill became a landmark used to orient themselves on the lake. Its use extended beyond just milling grain, it became an anchor point for the city itself. The mill's first production run finished in December 1832. The first recorded sale was made to a King Street baker. Flour was sold in wooden barrels for about $5 each. By the end of the year, nearly 3,000 bushels of wheat had been ground. Everything seemed to be working, but something unexpected began to happen. One customer regularly purchased wheat, rye, malt, and middlings, not for bread, but for distilling. Records aren't clear where his distillery was located, possibly near King Street or close to the Don River, but the implication was obvious. Grain did not have to be thrown away, and it could be distilled. Another thing that's unclear is exactly when Wartz and Gooderham began experimenting with alcohol production. But what is clear is that James Wartz would never live to see where the idea led. In February 1834, tragedy struck. Elizabeth Gooderham Wartz died in childbirth. James Wartz was devastated, and within days, overwhelmed by grief, he walked to the company well near the windmill and jumped in. The man who built Toronto's first great landmark was gone, and he was buried at St. James Cemetery. A memorial still exists for him and Elizabeth in Horning, England. It's at this point that William Gooderham carried on with the enterprise, at first alone, and later with Wartz's son, James Gooderham Wartz. By 1837, they had built a small still and produced their first batch of whiskey. They weren't the first distillers in York, several others were already operating, but something set them apart: their scale, their location, and their infrastructure. The windmill remained central to the operation, but it never quite worked as Wartz had imagined. The wind on the site was unreliable, so in 1845 a steam engine was installed, and by 1853 the sails of the windmill were removed entirely. The tower that once defined the skyline slowly lost its purpose. It wasn't until 1859 that the windmill was finally demolished. Brick by brick it disappeared, replaced by industrial buildings that would eventually form what we now call the Distillery District. Over the decades, a lot changed. The town of York became Toronto, the shoreline moved south, railways replaced ships, and industry replaced wind. And as all this was going on, and as time lapsed, the windmill faded from memory. And that was until 2003. During sewer construction beneath the Distillery District, workers struck something unexpected: a curved wall just beneath the pavement. Archaeologists were brought in. They uncovered sections of limestone foundation only 60 centimeters below the surface, and determined the original structure had been over 10 meters in diameter, resting on a massive circular base nearly a meter thick. To mark the spot, an arc of red bricks was placed directly over the original footprint. And that arc still sits there today, quietly, unassuming, and most people don't even see it as they walk by. If you want more Toronto stories just like this one, I share them in my private group. You can sign up for this group through the link below, but there is a waiting list, and I'll email you when a spot opens up. Please like and subscribe to this channel for more Toronto videos just like this. And until next time, take care.